Hans Christian Andersen and Charles Dickens were contemporaries. Why am I talking about Charles Dickens? Because Dickens was a great fan of Andersen and a champion of Andersen, and of course we are also coming in and out of England. They were contemporaries. Dickens about 6 years the younger of the two. They knew of each other, they admired each other's work, and they wanted to meet. And the first meeting came about because Andersen was coming to London more and more often because his English language translators and his publisher, Bentley, they were, of course, based in London. So the occasion of their first meeting in July of 1847 was a dinner party that was thrown in Andersen's honor at the home of Marguerite Gardiner. And Marguerite had acquired the title of Lady Blessington through one of her marriages, the Countess of Blessington. And she was Irish. She was an Irish novelist who also wrote nonfiction, including a well-regarded book called Conversations with Byron. Lady Blessington had a home on the site where Royal Albert Hall stands today. And it was known as the Gore House. And if you know that area around Royal Albert, there is Kensington Gore. And in fact, if you were to write for proms tickets or such to Royal Albert Hall, you would address the envelope Royal Albert Hall, Kensington Gore. It was considered quite scandalous to visit Lady Blessington's home at that time because she was living with a man to whom she was not married, a French Count d'Orsay, who was separated from her stepdaughter. She was living, in fact, with her son-in-law. So here is what fairy tales looked like before Andersen. Prior to Andersen, fairy tales were being collected. They were being passed down generation to generation in the oral tradition with authorship long lost. Charles Perrault in France and the Brothers Grimm in Germany collected and published fairy tales. They were not writing original fairy tales. And at that time, nursery rhymes and fairy tales were not taught in the schools. They were considered to be frivolous, taken care of at home. And Dickens got Andersen. That is, he understood, he appreciated Andersen. So what was there for Dickens and others to admire in Andersen? Both had been formed by struggle and hardship. By no means had either of them come from the gentleman class, and each portrayed the working class with understanding and dignity. And like many characters in Dickens' novels, Andersen came from quite humble beginnings. He was the son of a cobbler and an illiterate washerwoman. So Dickens got that, and he got it that Andersen was creating a new genre of literature that is original, not passed down, but original fairy tales. Andersen took more than a year to write The Ugly Duckling. He was struggling with the metaphor. He had to get it right. And who among us can tell that story to a child without remembering that at some time in our life, in some way or ways, we were all ugly ducklings? The Emperor's New Clothes, is that just about a naked emperor or a fresh way of looking at things and looking beyond vanity? And who can tell that story to a child without remembering that at some time or another, didn't we all follow the crowd as well? What was Andersen's great contribution? He elevated peasant tales to a new genre of literature. In the beginning, he himself thought that he was just writing for children, but it was soon clear to him and then to the rest of the world that he was dealing with universal truths. And these went to the heart of adults, or perhaps the child within each adult, as well as to children, and it was a revolutionary shift. Some spoke to the child, some spoke to the adult. Andersen spoke to both. So Dickens also appreciated Andersen's range of literary forms. For example, Andersen published an autobiography, and it was kind of a rolling autobiography. He was updating it every 10 years or so, and there were several different titles for it. Sometimes it was called The True Story of My Life, sometimes My Life as a Fairy Tale, sometimes The Book of My Life. Once when he was asked about all these different titles, someone said, "What should it really be called?" And he said, "What it really should be called is The Ugly Duckling." Because he thought himself unattractive. He was tall, he was gangly, he had a Roman nose. His walk was not fluid. There were elbows and knees sticking out in a herky-jerky fashion, and he thought himself to be an unattractive person. In addition to working on his autobiography, he dealt in other literary genres, including poetry. He wrote travelogues. He was a big traveler through Europe. He wrote plays, he wrote songs, and of course, he wrote fairy tales. At Lady Blessington's home, Dickens raced across to meet Dickens. Andersen was delighted to meet him. They had a little private chat out on the veranda, but Andersen was never comfortable with English. His German was a little better, but it has often been said he had trouble with Danish. And in fact, whenever he wrote out a manuscript, it had to be corrected in terms of grammar and spelling by others before it went to his publisher. Some said he was dyslexic, but it's a little difficult to try to understand dyslexia 135 years after his death. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, I don't know. So after their meeting at Lady Blessington's home, Dickens autographed a dozen beautifully bound, leather-bound volumes of his works, and he had them sent over to Andersen's Hotel in Leicester Square. And in each of them, he made an inscription to Hans Christian Andersen from his friend and admirer, Charles Dickens. Now, there are three or four of these volumes around today, and they will occasionally show up at book fairs and book auctions and the like. But if you ever come across one of these in a dusty bookstore somewhere, inscribed by Dickens to Andersen, hang on to it, because they are worth more than £100,000 each. Along with those books, Dickens also left an invitation for Andersen to visit him.